You know how she is. I require his assistance right away, I firmly stated. Inform him that Richard Montgomery is present. She rapidly nodded, her hands fluttering across the keyboard. Within moments, the inner office door swung wide open. Victor Thorne stepped out, buttoning his pristine, charcoal suit jacket. You know how she is, Dad. Victor had served as my primary wealth management consultant for well over 2 decades. He was a sharp, calculating, and impeccably polished professional who had helped me navigate multi-million-dollar land acquisitions and complex corporate tax strategies. He knew every single detail of my financial life, or so I had always assumed. Richard, my absolute deepest condolences, Victor expressed warmly, stepping forward to offer a firm, solemn handshake. I received word about Beatrice passing away. The entire upper management of the institution grieves with you. Please, come inside. I followed him straight into his expansive corner office. It was an environment of refined luxury, featuring heavy velvet drapes. You know how she is, Dad, historical oil paintings of the Boston skyline, and a massive mahogany desk facing sweeping views of the harbor. Victor rounded the desk, pulled out a plush leather armchair for me, and then quietly took his seat. I imagine you are here to initiate the standard estate transition protocols for Beatrice's small operational checking accounts, Victor remarked gently. You know how she is, Dad, pulling up a digital file on his terminal. We can make this process as painless as humanly possible for you during this difficult time. Actually, Victor? No, I answered softly. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and drew out the worn navy blue paper passbook. I gently set it down on the smooth, dark surface of his mahogany desk, right between us. I found this hidden at the bottom of her sewing box earlier today, I explained, watching his face intently. I want to know what it is, at most. Victor smiled politely, leaning forward to inspect the object. A paper passbook? Goodness, Richard, First Boston Bank phased these physical ledgers out in the late 90s. It's likely just a tiny, forgotten reserve account from her early days running the bookstore. Probably contains a few $100s at most. He casually extended his hand, picked up the faded booklet, and opened the front cover. I watched Victor's face carefully. In less than 3 seconds, every single drop of color completely drained from his face. The polite, professional composure he had cultivated over a 30-year career in private banking vanished entirely. His jaw dropped slightly open, his eye nug in sheer, unadulterated terror. His hands began to tremble so violently that the heavy paper passbook rustled loudly in the quiet room. Victor? I asked, my voice dropping an octave as I leaned forward. What is wrong with you? He didn't answer me right away. You know how she is, Dad. He frantically flipped through the crisp inner pages of the booklet, his eyes scanning row after row of stamped figures, handwritten serial codes. You know how she is, Dad, and dark red official validation seals. His breathing became noticeably shallow and erratic. This cannot possibly be real, Victor whispered. You know how she is, Dad. His voice cracking with pure panic, he abruptly bolted upright from his executive chair. He practically sprinted toward the heavy mahogany door of his office, grabbed the brass handle, and slammed the lock into place. He lowered the privacy blinds over the glass panels, completely sealing us off from the busy bank floor outside. He turned around, his skin, now an ashen gray, sweat actively breaking out along his hairline. Richard, Victor gasped, leaning heavily against his desk as he stared at me with terrified eyes. Where in God's name did you get this passbook? I told you, I answered, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs like a caged animal. It was written in Beatrice's sewing box. What is written in that book, Victor? Victor picked up his desk phone with a shaking hand, rapidly typing in a top priority internal security clearance code. Please stay right where you are and do not move. Victor urged, his voice barely above an urgent, trembling whisper into the receiver. I need to notify our senior security director and the authorities immediately. You know how she is, Dad. I sat completely frozen in the plush leather chair, my heart pounding violently against my rib cage. The silence inside Victor's locked office was suffocating. Outside the high, draped windows, the gray Boston rain continued to streak down, blurring the city lights. Across the mahogany desk, Victor stood with the phone pressed tight to his ear, his fingers drumming a nervous, erratic rhythm against the wood. Yes, this is Thorne, Victor said into the receiver, his voice tight and breathless. I have a level 1 clearance anomaly in my office right now. I need the regional fraud director and the lead federal investigator assigned to the regional oversight board on a secure line immediately. Yes, right now. It involves down. He collapsed heavily, receiver down. The receiver down, and collapsed heavily back into his leather chair, running a trembling hand through his thinning hair. You know how she is, Dad. He looked completely unraveled, a sharp contrast to the calm, impeccably dressed wealth manager I had known for 20 years. Victor, talk to me, I commanded, using the stern, unyielding authority that had built my real estate empire. That is my wife's passbook. What is going on? Why are you calling federal investigators? Victor looked up, his eyes wide and darting toward the locked door before returning to me. He drew a long, ragged breath, trying to steady his breathing. Richard, what you hold in your hands isn't just an old paper passbook, Victor began, his voice barely above a whisper. This is a master bearer key to an off-ledger, non-depository trust vault created over 35 years ago under First Boston's private charter. I frowned. You know how he is, Dad. My mind racing through decades of financial knowledge. A bearer trust? Beatrice was a small-scale book restorer. She lived on a modest income from her shop. Why would she have access to an off-ledger trust? Because she didn't just restoration work old books, Richard, Victor said, placing his palms flat on the desk to stop them from shaking. She was the primary custodian of an independent archival fund. 35 years ago, Beatrice inherited a massive historic land portfolio from her maternal family estate. She never told you, did she? The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. I stared at him, completely speechless. A land portfolio? What are you talking about? The historic waterfront district, Victor explained. You know how she is, Dad, pointing a trembling finger at the blue booklet. Before the city redeveloped the harbor in the late 80s, you know how she is. Her family owned the original commercial land rights under nearly a third of the primary maritime sector. When the city modernized, those land rights were converted into long-term master leases. Beatrice didn't want the fame, the corporate battles, or the chaotic lifestyle that comes with immense wealth. She saw how hard you were fighting in the high-stakes real estate market. You know how she is, Dad, and she chose to keep her inheritance entirely separate. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know how she is, Dad. She placed those long-term land lease yields into this private bearer account. Over 35 years, with compound growth, municipal bond reinvestments, and inflation adjustments. Richard, this account isn't worth a few $100s. You know how she is, Dad. The liquidity balance tied directly to this passbook is over $85 million. $85 million. He laughed about it. The figure shattered the quiet office like a physical explosion. My breath caught in my throat. My mind reeled as I struggled to process the sheer scale of what he was saying. You know how she is, Dad. Beatrice, my humble, quiet wife, who wore simple clothes and spent her days in a dusty, paper-scented bookshop, you know how she is, Dad, had been sitting on an independent fortune that rivaled my own commercial empire. She kept this hidden from me, I asked. My voice choked with a mixture of profound shock and deep confusion. For nearly 4 decades? She didn't keep it hidden out of deceit, Victor said gently, his tone softening with genuine empathy. Look at the secondary authorization clauses on page 4. Read what she wrote. You know how she is, Dad. With trembling fingers, I reached across the desk and pulled the navy booklet back toward me. I opened the worn, yellowed pages, bypassing the long columns of stamped numbers until my eyes landed on a section filled with Beatrice's familiar, elegant handwriting. The ink was faded, but her words were, the note read. To my beloved Richard, the note read. If you are reading means I have left is Dad. If you are reading this, it means I have left this world and you are standing alone against the storms we always knew might come. I built this reserve silently, away from the corporate eyes, the tax structures, and the greed that so often consumes the world you fight in every day. You know how she is, Dad. I did not keep this from you out of a lack of trust, but to serve as an untouchable shield for you when you need it most. I have watched with a broken heart as she slipped further into entitlement, arrogance, and cold calculation, spurred on by Derek's ruthless ambition. I knew that when I passed, their true natures would be revealed, and they would move to strip you of everything you spent your life building. You know how she is, Dad. This fund is legally structured so that it cannot be touched by family trusts, corporate liens, or power of attorney transfers. It belongs solely to you. How she is, Dad, controlled exclusively by the physical possession of this bearer book. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to find peace. I love you endlessly. Eat. A lump formed in my throat, and tears burned the backs of my eyes. Beatrice hadn't been keeping a secret to betray me. She had spent decades silently constructing an indestructible financial sanctuary to safeguard me from the very betrayal currently unfolding at my own home. There's more. There's more, Richard, Victor interrupted quietly, his expression hardening again as he checked his computer terminal, and this is why I had to initiate an immediate security protocol. I wiped a tear from my eye and looked up. What do you mean? You know how she is. 3 days ago, Victor said, turning the screen slightly so I could see the digital transaction logs. An attempted power of attorney override was submitted against this specific off-ledger account number. Someone tried to wire $50 million out of this vault into an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands. My blood ran instantly cold. What? Who submitted it? The submission came from a boutique wealth management firm, Victor said, his eyes locking on to mine with grave solemnity. The managing partner who signed the fraudulent authorization documents was your son-in-law, Derek Vance. A sickening wave of anger rushed through my veins, hot and explosive. The piece of the puzzle finally snapped violently into place. Everything. Valerie's callous impatience, her dismissive cruelty when she threw the passbook into the trash, Derek's overly smooth speech in the driveway, his desperate eagerness to have me sign over the estate management papers. It wasn't just opportunism. It was a calculated criminal heist. Derek had somehow discovered the existence of Beatrice's off-ledger account number through her personal documents while she was sick in the hospital. But he hadn't realized how the bearer trust was structured. He had attempted to wire the money electronically, but the bank's high-security system had frozen the attempt because it required the physical presentation of the vintage passbook to authorize any transfer over $1,000. They didn't just throw the passbook in the trash because they thought it was worthless. Valerie had tossed it aside because she didn't recognize what it was, but Derek was desperately searching the house for the physical key to unlock the $50 million he had already tried to steal. If I hadn't retrieved that little Navy book from the trash, Derek would have quietly gone back into the room, found it, and executed the transfer, leaving me utterly ruined and legally compromised. Before I could speak, a sharp against the locked office door. Victor stood up quickly, walked over, and unlocked the door. Victor stood up quickly, walked over, and unlocked it. Busy? You know how she is, Dad. Two men in dark, tailored suits stepped into the room, carrying sleek leather briefcases. Behind them stood the bank's chief head of security. Mr. Montgomery, you know how she is, Dad, the lead agent said, stepping forward and displaying an official badge. I am Special Agent Marcus Vance with the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Mr. Thorne alerted us to the unauthorized access attempt on this primary ledger account. You know how she is, Dad. We have been monitoring Mr. Derek Vance's fraudulent activities for the past 72 hours. You knew about Derek? I asked, my voice rising in anger and disbelief. You know how she is, Dad. We knew someone within his firm was attempting to breach high-value inactive trusts using forged signatures. Agent Vance explained. You know how she is, Dad, setting his briefcase on Victor's conference table. When the transfer request hit this specific account 3 days ago, However, we lacked the physical evidence linking the initial forgery, the physical evidence, personal terminal, without the original passbook and authentication, resting on the key. He looked down at the navy blue booklet resting on Victor's desk. He'd laughed about it. That physical passbook is the final piece of evidence we need, the agent continued crisply. It contains the original security signatures and the physical validation codes. You know how she is, Dad. With that book in our possession, alongside the fraudulent electronic transfer documents Derek submitted, we have an ironclad case for grand larceny, interstate bank fraud, you know how she is, Dad, an attempt to defraud a senior citizen. The agent looked at me with deep respect and seriousness. Mr. Montgomery, your son-in-law didn't just try to manage your estate. He attempted to execute one of the largest private bank frauds in this city's history, and he did it while your wife was on her deathbed. I stood in the center of the quiet, luxurious office, staring at the federal agents in the blue passbook. The profound grief that had weighed down my chest all morning suddenly transformed into a sharp, icy clarity. My daughter had stood in my house. You know how she is, Dad. Draped in designer clothes, bought with my money, and treated her mother's memory like garbage. Her husband had stood in my driveway, smiling to my face. You know how she is, Dad. Pretending to offer comfort while holding a metaphoric knife against my back. You know how she is, Dad. They believed I was a broken, defenseless old man whom they could easily manipulate and discard. They were about to learn a brutal lesson about the man who built this city. Agent Vance, I said, my voice completely steady, cold, and devoid of fear. What is the next step? You know how she is, Dad. We need to arrest Derek Vance and any co-conspirators involved in the forgery, the agent replied. However, to ensure no assets are hidden and to catch him in the act of executing the fraud, we need to present the trap. A slow, grim smile touched my lips. He wants me to sign over estate management authorization. He told me he already drafted the paperwork and was waiting for me at my estate. Agent Vance nodded sharply. If you return to the house and allow him to present those documents while our undercover surveillance team monitors the interaction, he will commit a direct, caught-on-camera federal felony on your property. We can move in and take him into custody immediately. And my daughter? I asked, a brief pang of old affection flickering in my heart before being snuffed out by the memory of her cold, arrogant laughter in the bedroom. If Valerie was aware of the fraudulent attempt or assisted in hiding or securing the physical passbook to facilitate the theft, she will be charged as a full co-conspirator. Agent Vance stated plainly, "The law does not make exceptions for family, Mr. Montgomery." "Good," I said, the word cutting through the air like a steel blade. "Because neither do I." I reached down, picked up Beatrice's Navy passbook, and held it tightly in my hand. "Let's go home." 30 minutes later, my slate-gray Bentley pulled back onto the long, gravel driveway of my estate. You know how she is, Dad. The rain had intensified, drumming heavily against the roof of the car. Through the blur of the windshield wipers, I could see the grand, illuminated facade of my house. You know how The catering vans had mostly cleared out, but the luxury vehicles belonging to Derek and Valerie were still parked right near the front entrance. As I killed the engine, I glanced into my rear view mirror. A plain, unmarked dark SUV pulled up to the main gate, parking out of sight down the tree-lined street. Federal agents were in position. You know how she is, Dad. I slid the passbook into my inner jacket pocket, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold, torrential rain. I walked up the stone steps. You know how she is, Dad. Pushed open the heavy mahogany front door and stepped inside. The grand foyer was quiet now. The lingering smells of expensive catering and floral arrangements filled the air. Standing near the bottom of the sweeping marble staircase were Valerie and Derek. They were huddled together in quiet, intense, hushed conversation, their heads closed, checking a tablet screen. The moment the front door clicked shut, "You know how she is, Dad," they both snapped their heads toward me. "Dad!" Valerie exclaimed, her tone instantly shifting back to that practiced, annoyed impatience. "Where on earth have you been? You've been gone for over 2 hours. People were asking where you went, and it was completely embarrassing having to make up excuses for you." Derek quickly smoothed down his designer suit jacket and stepped forward, putting on his signature, warm, persuasive smile. "Richard, we were getting worried," Derek said smoothly, his tone dripping with fake warmth. "We thought the grief might have gotten the better of you out there in the rain. How she had dad, but I'm glad you're back. While you were gone, I went ahead and finalized the estate administrative management transfer agreements. Everything is printed, organized. You know how she is, Dad, and ready for your signature right here in the study." He gestured gracefully toward the heavy double doors of my private office down the hall. I looked at Derek. I looked at his polished shoes, his immaculate suit, and the heavy gold Rolex gleaming on his wrist. Then I looked at Valerie, standing there with her arms crossed, looking at me with cold, calculating eyes. You know how she is, Dad, waiting for me to hand over the keys to my life. "In the study, Derek?" I asked softly, stepping further into the foyer, my wet shoes leaving dark footprints on the pristine marble floor. "You know how she is, Dad. Are you sure you don't want to talk about the passbook first?" Derek's smooth smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A quick, sharp flicker of unease flashed across his eyes before he quickly covered it up. The passbook? Richard, I thought Valerie explained that to you. That was just an old, useless piece of paper from Beatrice's old shop. It has no value. Is that why you tried to wire $50 million out of that specific account 3 days ago, Derek? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, echoing off the high ceilings of the foyer. The air in the room instantly turned to ice. Valerie's jaw dropped in absolute shock. She looked from me to Derek, her face instantly turning pale. What? Derek, what is he talking about? Derek stood completely frozen. The color drained from his face at a staggering speed, leaving him looking as ghost-white as the marble floor beneath his feet. His hands began to visibly shake. Richard, I don't know what kind of misunderstanding you've had, Derek stammered, his polished, persuasive demeanor completely shattering into panic. I'm a licensed financial manager. I don't know what account you're referencing. I'm referencing the first Boston off ledger bearer. Trust account, I said, stepping closer to them. Salt every inch the ruthless corporate titan they had forgotten I was. The account my wife created 35 years ago. The account you tried to forge my name to access while Beatrice was dying in a hospital room. Dad, you're crazy! Valerie shrieked, her voice high-pitched and hysterical as she grabbed Derek's arm. You're losing your mind. Grief is making you paranoid. Derek has been trying to help you. Silence, Valerie, I thundered, my voice booming through the foyer with a force that made her physically flinch backward. Do not utter another word of your manufactured lies in my home. I drew the navy blue passbook from my jacket and held it up high. You threw this into the trash, Isha said, held it up high. You threw this into the trash, I said, staring directly at my daughter. You called your mother's legacy garbage. You said she never had any money. He searched this house for it, because his fraudulent transfer was blocked. Fraudulent transfer was blocked without this physical ledger. Derek made a desperate, sudden movement forward, his eyes locked onto the booklet in my hand. Richard, give me that book. Before he could take another step, the front doors were violently thrown open. Federal agents, do not move. Agent Vance and 4 heavily armed federal officers rushed into the foyer. You know how she is, Dad, their badges clearly displayed, weapons unholstered. You know how she is, Dad. You know how she read the walls. The sharp, commanding voices echoed the walls. Valerie screamed, stumbling backward onto the stairs. Derek froze in absolute terror, his hands reflexively flying into the air as the agents quickly surrounded him. Derek Vance, you are under arrest for federal bank fraud, grand larceny, and electronic forgery. Agent Vance announced sternly, slamming Derek face first against the marble pillar near the staircase and forcing hands behind his back. The loud, sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed clearly in the quiet foyer. Valerie, do something. Valerie, do something. Call our lawyers, Derek shrieked, his face pressed painfully against the stone. His composure entirely gone. Tell them it's a mistake. Valerie was shaking uncontrollably, her tears ruining her $4,000 Prada dress. She dropped to her knees on the marble steps, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Dad, please, help him, she sobbed, all of her previous arrogance and dismissal into pathetic desperation evaporating into pathetic desperation. It was just a mistake. He was trying to secure our family's future. We did it for us. You have so much money, Dad. You don't need it. Please don't let them take him. I stood above her on the stairs, looking down at my daughter. There was no anger left in my heart, only a deep, cold, unwavering clarity. "You didn't do this for the family, Valerie," I said, my voice quiet and unforgiving. "You did this out of pure, unadulterated greed. You disrespected your mother's memory. You tried to rob your own father while he was mourning. You know how she is, Dad. You traded your integrity for designer clothes and a lavish lifestyle, and now the bill has come due." Agent Vance turned to two of his officers. "Secure Valerie Vance as well. We have authorization to bring her in for questioning regarding co-conspiracy and evidence tampering." As the officers stepped forward to handcuff Valerie, she screamed and wept, begging me to intervene, calling out to her father. But I simply turned my back on them both. I watched silently from the grand doorway as the federal vehicles pulled away down the long, rain-soaked driveway, their flashing red and blue lights fading into the foggy Boston evening, carrying my daughter and her husband away to face the unyielding consequences of their choices. Justice had arrived, swift and absolute. In the days and weeks that followed, the full magnitude of their greed was uncovered by federal prosecutors. Derek's wealth management firm was exposed as a hollow facade, riddled with debt and fraudulent investments. Facing overwhelming evidence, including the passbook and digital transfer traces, Derek pled guilty to multiple federal felonies to avoid a maximum sentence, receiving a severe prison term. Valerie, found complicit in facilitating the fraud and attempting to destroy bank documentation, faced severe legal penalties, asset forfeitures, and complete financial ruin. "You know how she is, Dad. I cut them off entirely from my estate, my trust funds, and my life." "You know how she is, Dad. Every single cent of the $85 million bearer trust, along with my personal real estate empire, was laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. Was legally restructured into an untouchable charitable foundation established in Beatrice's name, a foundation dedicated to preserving historic literature and funding free educational facilities, yeshiva facilities, for underprivileged children across the city. You know how she is, Dad. Now, as I sit in the quiet, peaceful library of my estate, looking out over the gardens Beatrice so deeply loved, I hold the navy blue passbook in my hands one last time. My daughter thought her mother had nothing. But in the end, Beatrice's quiet wisdom and force saved my legacy, brought absolute justice to those who sought to destroy us. You know how she is, Dad, and proved that real strength doesn't scream. It quietly endures. Derek shoved the champagne bottle behind a marble cutting board, while Valerie hastily wiped her mouth, trying to compose her polished face into a fragile mask of grief. "Dad," Valerie breathed out, her voice pitching up in a forced, trembling squeak. "You scared us. We thought you were still up in the master bedroom trying to rest." Derek cleared his throat, taking a slow step forward. He smoothed down his wrinkled dress shirt, adjusting his posture to reclaim his smooth, professional demeanor. "Richard, welcome back inside. Valerie and I were we were overwhelmed by the emotional strain of the reception downstairs. We opened a bottle to toast your wife's memory in private." He'd laughed about it. I looked at the $5,000 bottle of Louis Roederer resting on the counter. I looked at the sparkling crystal glasses. I looked at my daughter's flushed cheeks. "You know how she is, Dad," which had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with greed. "To her memory," I repeated, my voice completely devoid of warmth. How touching. I walked further into the kitchen, my steady footsteps echoing against the porcelain tiles. I didn't yell. I didn't reach for them. I simply stood across from them at the kitchen island, placing my hands flat against the cool marble, projecting the quiet, calculated authority that had brought ruthless developers to their knees for 40 years. "I just came back from the financial district," I said softly, keeping my eyes locked on Derek. "I dropped by First Boston Bank." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. "You know how she is, Dad." The fake sympathy on Derek's face dissolved, replaced by a sudden, sharp stillness. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. Beside him, Valerie's eyes darted frantically towards husband, panic visibly breaking through her composure. "The bank?" Derek echoed. "You know how she is, Dad," his voice dropping an octave as he struggled to sound casual. "Why would you go to the main branch today, Richard? On the afternoon of Beatrice's memorial? That seems entirely unnecessary. I went because I found something in your mother's sewing box," Valerie's occurred, I answered, turning my gaze to my daughter. "The same little blue booklet you grabbed out of my hands and threw into the garbage. The one you claimed was completely worthless." Valerie, crossed her arms tightly, her expensive bracelet clicking loudly against her wrist. "It was worthless. It was an old paper book. From the 90s. Mom ran a tiny, failing bookstore, Dad. She didn't have real money. Everything we ever had came from you." "That is where you are wrong," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You know how she is, Dad. Your mother was an exceptionally brilliant woman. Long before tech stocks became household conversation, she used her small earnings to quietly build a massive portfolio in digital infrastructure. She didn't just restore old manuscripts, Valerie. She built a multi-million-dollar private trust, The revelation hit the room, my real estate empire. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Valerie's mouth opened slightly, her eyes widening in absolute shock. A private trust. $28 million, I stated, letting the exact figure hang in the cold air between us. Valerie gasped, stumbling back half a step against the counter. She stared at me. "You know how she is, Dad," her mind clearly attempting to calculate what that meant for her inheritance. But Derek didn't look surprised. His face didn't reflect shock. It reflected pure, unadulterated terror. He knew. He had known all along. 28 million, I continued, leaning in slightly, locking my eyes onto Derek's pale face. "And the most fascinating part, Derek, is what I learned when Victor Thorne pulled up the active log. Exactly 3 hours ago. You know how she is, Dad. Right around 10:15 this morning, while I was standing at the altar reading my wife's eulogy, someone initiated an unauthorized wire transfer to move every single dollar out of that trust." Valerie turned her head violently toward her husband, her voice rising into an anxious shriek. "Derek, what is he talking about? Wire transfer?" Derek's composure completely shattered. Sweat broke out along his forehead. Sweat broke out along Kay, glistening, raised a shot, the bright kitchen lights. He stid his hands defensively, backing away from the island. "Richard, listen to me. You don't understand how these complex institutional accounts work. There must be an automated administrative error. A system glitch." "It wasn't a glitch, Derek." I cut him off, my voice sharp as a razor. "The transfer was routed through intermediary entities directly into an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands called Horizon Global Holdings, and the quest. 2 forged documents attached to the request contained 2 forged signatures. My wife's, Mang, and mine." Valerie let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her face. "Forged signatures? Derek, what did you do? What did you do?" "Do? Shut up, Valerie!" Derek snapped, his polished facade entirely gone, exposing the desperate, ruthless predator underneath. He glared at me, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Richard? You sit up on your high horse, looking down on everyone, clutching your empire. You never gave me a real chance. You treated me like a low-level broker while you hoarded tens of millions. So you decided to rob a deceased woman on the day of her funeral?" I asked, my tone icy cold. "You know how she is, Dad, didn't it? You stood in my driveway, hugged my shoulders, and tried to trick me into signing away my estate management while you were actively looting my wife's legacy. Fulshid, we needed that capital," Derek shouted, completely abandoning all pretenses of innocence. My firm was facing a massive liquidity margin call. "You know how she is, Dad. If I didn't move those funds today, my entire firm would have collapsed by the end of the week. I would have been ruined. We were going to put the money back after we stabilized our positions. You wouldn't have even noticed. You used my mother's name." Valerie screamed at him, tears finally breaking through her makeup, though they were tears of fear and ruin rather than remorse. "You told me we were just securing the family estate. You told me it was legal administrative paperwork. Don't play the innocent victim, Valerie." Derek roared back, turning on her with venomous cruelty. "You knew exactly what we were doing. Who do you think authorized the email verification codes from your personal tablet while your father was at the altar? While your father was at the altar. You pressed the button. You wanted the luxury cars. You wanted the $4,000 dresses. You were right there with me every step of the way." Valerie froze, her face draining of all color as the realization of her own legal peril crushed her. She turned to me, dropping to her knees on the hard tile floor, reaching out with trembling, manicured hands. "Dad, please," she sobbed hysterically. "Please, you have to protect me. He manipulated me. He lied to me. I didn't know it was illegal. I'm your daughter. You can't let him ruin my life." I stood over her, looking down at the girl I had raised, shielded, and given the world to. I felt no anger left, only a vast, cold emptiness. "You stood in my bedroom 2 hours ago, Valerie," I said softly, every word heavy with finality. "You looked at your mother's life's work, grabbed it like it was trash, and threw it away. You didn't care about her memory. You didn't care about my grief. You only cared about what you could take." "Richard, please," Derek pleaded, his voice breaking as he took a step back toward the hallway. "We can fix this quietly." Toward the hallway. Don't ruin our family over a transfer." "The transfer isn't going anywhere, Derek," I said calmly. "The transfer isn't going anywhere, Derek," I said calmly. "The bank froze the funds." "Bank froze hours ago, and the federal authorities have been tracking your digital footprint since this morning." Before Derek could even process my words, heavy boots thundered down the hallway. The kitchen doors burst open, and Special Agent Harris stepped into the room, flanked by 6 armed federal officers. Federal agents. "Stay where you are," Harris commanded, his voice slicing through the room with absolute authority. Derek tried to bolt toward the back patio doors, but his ruthless speed. Tackle agents moved with ruthless speed, tackling him onto the marble floor. The heavy sound of his body hitting the stone echoed through the mansion. "You know how she is," followed immediately by the sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. "Derek Vance, you are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny," Agent Harris announced grimly, hauling a weeping, disheveled Derek to his feet. Valerie screamed as another agent stepped forward, pulling her up from the floor and securing her hands behind her back. Dad, do something. Don't let them take me." "Please," I'm your daughter. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I simply watched as the federal marched my son-in-law and my daughter out of my home, their frantic cries fading down the long hallway until the heavy mahogany front door slammed shut, restoring complete, unbroken silence to the estate. In the months that followed, the legal hammer fell with unyielding precision. Facing overwhelming digital evidence, forged documentation, and federal wire logs, Black, she is Dad, Derek pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges to avoid a maximum sentence and was handed a lengthy prison term. Valerie, exposed as an active co-conspirator who facilitated the unauthorized authorization, faced severe legal penalties, asset forfeitures, and complete public disgrace. I stripped them completely from my will, revoked their access to all family trusts, and cut them out of my life entirely. You know how she is, Dad. Every single dollar of Beatrice's $28 million trust, along with the entirety of my own commercial real estate holdings, was legally transferred into a permanent, untouchable charitable foundation in her honor. A foundation dedicated to funding rare book preservation, supporting How She Is, Dad, supporting historic archives, and providing full educational scholarships for underprivileged young women across the country. Now, as the quiet afternoon rain softly taps against the tall windows of my study, I sit at my desk, holding the small, worn blue passbook in my hands. My daughter believed her mother had left behind nothing of value. She is, Dad. But in the end, Beatrice's quiet brilliance and foresight protected my legacy, exposed the darkness lurking in my own home, brought absolute justice to those who betrayed us, and proved that true strength doesn't need to shout. It simply endures. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. He's been drawing funds directly offshore holding to keep that Florida household completely off the books, Mike continued, his voice relentless and calm. You know how she is, Dad. He promised that woman he was finalizing a high-value trust restructure in Boston. He told her that once the transfer cleared, you know how she is, Dad, he would permanently relocate down south and cut all ties with your daughter. I stared down at the crisp color prints spread across the polished mahogany. The dark, twisted tapestry of their greed was finally complete in every horrific detail. Valerie had reduced her own mother's legacy to garbage, completely oblivious to the fact that her prized husband was actively using her, robbing her father. You know how she is, and preparing to abandon her for a hidden family built with stolen capital. What about Valerie? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that barely rustled the quiet air of the room. Is she named anywhere in those offshore property deeds? Mike drew out a final set of notarized documents from the briefcase. Not a single one. In fact, you know how she is, Go. 3 months ago, Derek discreetly altered the secondary beneficiary designations on his personal corporate insurance policies. You know how she is, Dad. If his wealth management firm collapsed, Valerie would have been left carrying the full weight of his toxic liabilities. You know how she is, Dad, while the remaining liquid reserves defaulted directly to the entity controlling the Florida residence. How she is, Dad. A terrible icy stillness settled over me. There were no tears left to shed, no lingering sorrow to dull the sharp edge of my focus. He'd laughed about it. Every illusion of my Mamie had been completely shattered, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding reality of what needed to be done. Keep the original file with you, Mike, I instructed, closing the heavy folder with a slow, deliberate motion. Special Agent Harris will be taking full custody of these materials within the hour. Understood. Mike nodded, sliding the papers back into his leather briefcase. Federal how she is. The federal surveillance units are already maintaining a tight perimeter around your front gate. Once you give the signal, they will move in. Thank you, Mike, I said quietly. You know how she is, Dad. You've done your job. Now it's time I finish mine. He gave a brief, solemn nod, stepped mein Wurm through the private door and vanished cool eining mist. I sat alone in the dim, silent office for a few moments, feeling the weight of the vintage blue passbook tucked safely inside my inner coat pocket. I stood up, smoothed in a chalkbook tucked suit, smoothed the lapels of my dark suit, unlocked the heavy oak door, and unlocked the heavy oak door. I walked down the long shadowed hallway toward the sunlit kitchen, my footsteps heavy and measured on the hardwood floor. Valerie and Derek were already seated at the marble island. Derek looked completely frayed, his eyes bloodshot as he stared frantically at his digital tablet. He refreshing the bank portal over and over again. Valerie sat beside him, nursing her lukewarm tea, her face tense with growing irritation at his erratic behavior. The moment they heard me approach, they both stiffened. You know how she is, Dad, instantly forcing those practiced, tragic masks back onto their faces. Dad, Valerie began, her tone dripping with that familiar, you know how she is, Dad, artificial sweetness as she rose from her stool. You're up early. We were just coming to check on you. You really need to take it easy today. I am feeling remarkably clear today, Valerie, I answered, my voice steady, resonant. You know how she is, Dad, and completely stripped of any weakness. Derek looked up from his tablet, a desperate, frantic gleam flashing in his sunken eyes. Richard, the estate administrative paperwork. We really need to finalize those signatures this morning. The financial deadlines are non-negotiable. There won't be any signatures, Derek, I said softly, stepping closer to the island and resting my hands flat against the cold stone. You know how she is, Dad, and there won't be any wire transfer clearing to Horizon Global Holdings. Derek froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and ashen. What did you just say? Valerie frowned, her brows furrowing in confusion. Dad, what are you talking about? What wire transfer? I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out the worn, navy blue passbook. He'd laughed about it and set it down firmly on the center of the marble island right between them. Your mother was never a helpless, simple woman, Valerie, I said, looking directly into my daughter's eyes. She built a private, untouched $28 million trust over 35 years. You know how she is, Dad. The very passbook you grabbed from my hands and tossed into the trash was the physical key to that entire legacy. Valerie's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. She looked from the blue book to her husband. 28 million? Derek, is this true? Derek didn't answer her. He was breathing in short, panicked gasps, staring at me like I was a ghost. Richard, listen to me. He knew Valerie, I continued, my voice cold and unyielding. He discovered the account number while your mother was dying. And while I was standing at her altar giving her eulogy, he attempted to forge our signatures and wire every single dollar to an offshore shell account in the Cayman Islands. You lying old bastard! Derek suddenly roared, slamming his hands onto the marble counter, his mask of polite composure completely shattering into pure, vicious anger. You think you can play games with me? I needed that capital. My firm was going under, and you were sitting on millions you didn't even know existed. Derek! Valerie shrieked, backing away in absolute terror. What did you do? What did you do? Shut up, Valerie, Derek spat, turning on her with venomous rage. You were right there with me. You authorized the confirmation codes from your tablet. You wanted the money just as much as I did. You wanted the lifestyle. I didn't know you were stealing from a hidden trust, she sobbed, panic choking her voice as she realized the catastrophic mess she was in. Dad, please? I didn't know. He tricked me. You didn't care to know. You called your mother's life's work coldly. You called your mother's life's work garbage. You tossed her legacy into the trash because you thought she had nothing left to offer you. You only cared about what you could take. It doesn't matter, Derek snarled, reaching frantically across the island to grab the passbook. Give me that book. The transfer is still processing. I can override the clearance. Before his fingers could touch the faded paper, the heavy front doors of the mansion were kicked open with a thunderous crash that shook the walls. Federal agents. Don't move. You know how she is, Dad. Special Agent Harris and a full tactical unit poured into the foyer and surged into the kitchen, their hair-heavy boots loud against the pristine tile. You know how she is, Dad, weapons drawn and badges clearly displayed. Get on the ground. Now, an officer commanded. Now, Derek tried to bolt toward the rear glass patio doors, but 2 agents tackled him instantly, slamming him face first onto the hard marble floor. The heavy impact echoed through the room, followed immediately by the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists. Derek Vance, you are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny, Agent Harris announced crisply, hauling the weeping, disheveled man to his feet. Valerie screamed hysterically, stumbling backward into the counter as 2 more agents stepped forward, securing her wrists behind her back. Dad, please, busy. Tell them to stop, Valerie wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup as she begged for mercy. I'm your daughter. You can't let them take me. Please, Dad. Help me. You know how she is, Dad. I stood entirely motionless, looking down at my daughter with a cold, unbending clarity. You ruined yourself, Valerie, I said quietly, my voice carrying no hatred. You know how she is, Dad, only the heavy, immutable weight of truth. You traded your family, your integrity, and your mother's memory for greed, and now you will face the full weight of the law. Agent Harris turned to his team. Take them both to the federal holding facility. As the officers marched them down the long hallway, Valerie's desperate screams and Derek's muffled curses slowly faded, and Derek, the heavy mahogany door clicked shut, leaving the grand estate in complete unbroken silence. In the weeks that followed, the full extent their criminal actions, in the weeks that fullest extent of their criminal actions was dismantled by federal authorities. You know how she is, Dad. Derek faced overwhelming digital evidence, forged documentation, and financial logs detailing his illicit debts, ultimately pleading guilty to multiple felony counts to avoid a maximum sentence, receiving a lengthy prison term. Valerie, exposed as a co-conspirator who facilitated the unauthorized access and attempted to destroy bank records, faced severe legal consequences, asset forfeitures, and complete public ruin. I cut them off entirely from my estate, revoked every trust allowance, and erased them from my will. You know, every single dollar of Beatrice's $28 million trust, along with the entirety of my own commercial real estate holdings, was legally transferred into a permanent, untouchable charitable foundation established in her honor. A foundation dedicated to funding rare manuscript preservation, supporting historic archives, and providing full educational opportunities for underprivileged women across the country. Now, as I sit In the quiet warmth of my private study, looking out at the rain gently falling over the gardens Beatrice loved so deeply, I hold the small, worn blue passbook in my hands one last time. My daughter believed her mother had left behind nothing of value. But, in the end, Beatrice's quiet wisdom and foresight protected my life, exposed the betrayal in my own home, brought absolute justice to those who tried to destroy us, and proved that true strength doesn't shout to, is not monitored, it simply does. Su Mad See, the dining room. Valerie walked into the dining room, carrying a heavy silver serving platter. You know how she is, Dad. She set it down in the center of the table with a soft, satisfied clink, then stepped behind my chair and smoothed a gentle hand over my shoulder. Dad, you know how she is, Dad. I had the kitchen staff prepare your absolute favorite pot roast tonight, she said, her voice dripping with warm, maternal affection. You know how she is, Dad. You haven't eaten a full meal since the memorial. You need to keep your strength up. You know how she is, Dad. I looked down at the steaming dish. I looked at the dark, rich gravy drizzled over the tender meat. You know how she is, Dad. Then I looked at the fine crystal wine glass Derek placed right beside my plate. I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that inside that food or inside that wine, you know how she is, Dad, a dangerous chemical sedative was waiting to erase my sanity and strip away my freedom forever. Thank you, Valerie, I answered, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. You are being remarkably attentive tonight. We just care about you, Richard. Derek chimed in, sliding into his chair across from me and raising his glass of red wine. We want to ensure you are fully taken care of. Atosi premlana, shremlana, to ensure you are fully the future care of. A toast to family and to navigating the future together. He'd laughed about it. Valerie sat beside him, raising her glass with a bright, triumphant smile. I picked up my water glass instead, holding it up into the warm light of the chandelier. Two consequences, I said softly, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a steel blade. Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly covered it with a forced chuckle, taking a deep gulp of his wine. You know how she is. Valerie took a delicate sip, her eyes locking onto my plate, silently waiting for me to take the first bite of the poisoned meal. I picked up my silver fork, cutting a small piece of roast. I lifted it halfway to my mouth, letting them watch, letting their heart rates spike in electric anticipation, letting them believe that their unspeakable plan was finally succeeding. Then, I gently set the fork back down on the porcelain plate. I received a very fascinating dossier early this morning, I remarked casually. You know how she is, Dad, leaning back into my leather dining chair. Derek paused, his glass hovering halfway to the table. A dossier? What are you talking about, Richard? You know how she is, Dad. It was a comprehensive private investigation report, I continued, keeping my tone conversationally light. It included some lovely full-color photographs taken down in Orlando, Florida. A charming suburban home with a pool, a beautiful 3-year-old boy who looks remarkably like you, Derek. The silence that fell over the dining room was violent. Derek's face drained of every single drop of color, turning a ghastly, sick rop of color. Sudis, sick white. Hidu. The heavy crystal wine glass slipped directly from his trembling fingers, shattering against the mahogany table and spilling deep red wine across the white tablecloth like a pool of fresh blood, her brow furrowing in deep, panicked confusion. Derek, what is he talking about? What home in Florida? Derek? He has a secret second family, Valerie. He has a second family, Valerie, I explained calmly, looking directly at my daughter. He bought a property in Orlando 4 years ago, using money he systematically stole from your monthly allowance. while you thought he was working hidden life with another woman using your money. Using your money. Valerie gasped, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at her pale, shivering husband. Derek, is this true? Answer me. Shut up, Valerie, Derek suddenly exploded, slamming his palms onto the stained table as he stood up, his polished mask utterly shattered into ugly, vicious desperation. Don't look at me like that. You know how she is, Dad. You used me just as much as I used you. You wanted the luxury lifestyle. You wanted the designer clothes and the European vacations. I gave you my trust. Valerie shrieked, tears instantly ruining her makeup as she lunged toward him. I helped you with the bank documents. I authorized the confirmation codes. And you did it out of pure parasitic greed, I thundered, my voice booming through the high-ceilinged room with a force that made both of them freeze in absolute terror. You know how she is, Dad. Neither of you cared about this family. Neither of you cared about Beatrice. You only cared about what you could steal. Valerie turned back to me. You know how she snowed, dropping to her knees on the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad, please, you have to believe me. I didn't know about Florida. I didn't know he was lying to me. He made me do it. You didn't need any convincing, Valerie, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper as I pulled out my tablet and tapped the screen. You didn't just help him forge bank records. 3 days ago, while your mother was lying in her hospice bed in a deep coma, you walked into her room with an ink pad. The color left Valerie's face so fast she looked like she was going to faint. What did you say? I turned the tablet screen toward them, playing the silent black and white video footage. Saman. You know how she is, Dad. Valerie watched in horrific silence as her own image appeared on the screen, grabbing her dying mother's limp hand, forcibly pressing her ink-stained thumb onto the forged transfer documents, and callously tossing her arm back onto the sterile bed before walking out without wiping the ink away. You know how she is, Dad. You violated your mother in her most vulnerable, sacred moment, I said, tears of absolute rage burning in my eyes. You turned her helpless body into a tool to steal her legacy. And when I hesitated to sign over my estate, you hired a corrupt doctor to drink my food, declare me insane, and lock me away in an asylum for the rest of my life. You know how she is, Dad. Valerie fell flat on her face against the floor, weeping hysterically, unable to utter a single word of defense as the absolute monstrosity of her actions was laid bare in front of her. Derek made a sudden, frantic move, lunging toward his coat hanging near the entryway, desperately reaching for I'm leaving. You have nothing on me. Before his hand could touch the brass doorknob, the massive mahogany front doors were kicked open with a deafening crash that shook the entire estate. Federal agents, on the ground. Don't move. Special Agent Harris and a fully armed tactical unit stormed into the mansion, their heavy boots loud against the hardwood floor, weapons trained directly on Derek. Get down on the floor. Hands behind your head, an officer barked. Derek tried to push past them, but 2 agents tackled him instantly, slamming him face first onto the floor. The heavy impact echoed through the grand foyer, followed immediately by the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. Derek Vance, you are under arrest for federal bank fraud, wire fraud, screw fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Agent Harris announced sternly, hauling the weeping, disheveled man to his feet. Valerie screamed wildly as 2 more agents stepped into the dining room, pulling her up from the floor and securing her hands tightly behind her back. Dad, Please, don't let them do this, Valerie wailed, her voice cracking into pathetic, desperate shrieks as she was dragged toward the door. I'm your daughter. I'm your only child. You can't leave me to rot in prison. Please, Dad, forgive me. I stood at the head of the table, tall, unbending, and completely cold. I looked into the eyes of the daughter I had raised, shielded, and given the world to, and I felt nothing left. No love, no sorrow, no regret. You destroyed your own life, Valerie, I said quietly, every word cutting through her desperate cries with absolute finality. You traded your integrity, your family, and your mother's memory for greed. And now, you will answer to the law. You know how she is, Dad. Agent Harris gave me a brief, respectful nod before gesturing to his team. Take them both into custody. I stood silently in the grand entryway. How she is, Dad, watching as the federal vehicles pulled away down the long, rain-soaked driveway, their flashing red and blue lights fading into the dark Boston night. You know how she is, Dad, carrying my daughter and her husband away to face the total, unyielding consequences of their choices. Fischstad. Justice had finally arrived, absolute and unforgiving. In the months that followed, the full magnitude of their crimes was systematically dismantled in a federal courtroom. Facing undeniable video evidence, digital audit logs, intercepted communications, and the original passbook, signed as, Derek pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts to avoid a maximum sentence, receiving a severe, decades-long prison term. Valerie, convicted of grand larceny, elder abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy, was stripped of all assets and handed a lengthy federal prison sentence of her own. You know how she is, Dad. I completely cut them off from my estate, revoked every trust allowance, and legally erased them from my will forever. You know how she is, Dad. Every single dollar of Beatrice's $28 million trust, along with the entirety of my own commercial real estate holdings, you know how she is, Dad, was legally transferred into a permanent, untouchable, charitable foundation established in her honor. A foundation dedicated to funding rare manuscript preservation, supporting how she is, supporting historic archives, and providing full educational scholarships for underprivileged young women across the nation. Now, as I sit in the quiet, peaceful warmth of my library, watching the soft morning light fall over the gardens, Beatrice loved so deeply. I hold the small, worn blue passbook in my hands one last time. My daughter believed her mother had left behind nothing of value. But in the end, Beatrice's quiet brilliance and foresight protected my freedom, exposed the darkness in my home, brought absolute justice to those who betrayed us, and proved that true strength doesn't need to shout. It simply endures. Dinner is ready, Dad, Valerie cheerfully announced, carrying Silverschutje Slaaf's serving platter out of the kitchen. She had prepared my absolute favorite, Dad. She had prepared my absolute favorite meal, slow-roasted prime rib paired with glazed root vegetables. The chilly, dark irony hidden behind this grand gesture certainly wasn't lost on me. She set down a generous portion right in front of me, her smile stretched so uncomfortably tight across her face that it looked painful. We felt like we really needed a special moving forward dinner tonight, she explained, taking the seat directly to my right. These past 2 days have been filled with so much unbearable grief. But Mom wouldn't want us to just freeze in place. She'd want us to find a beautiful path forward together as a family. I looked down at the steaming cut of meat and the rich, dark gravy pooling across the pristine white porcelain plate. Somewhere inside that perfectly arranged meal sat a massive, unauthorized dose of a dangerous chemical compound, Dr. Thorne's prescription, Tade C. Thorne's prescription was waiting right there to completely hijack my central nervous system, trigger uncontrollable tremors and severe paranoias, and legally justify locking me away in a private mental institution for the rest of my days. The cold, calculating cruelty behind her domestic hospitality was truly staggering. I picked up the heavy silver fork and knife, casually pushing the meat around the plate with a slow, deliberate laziness. Like, you know how she is, Dad. I created the seamless illusion that I was just about to take a bite without ever actually bringing a single piece to my mouth. It smells wonderful, Valerie, I said softly. You know how she is, Dad, keeping my voice faint, weak, and tired. My stomach is just completely tied up in knots right now. You know how she is, Dad. I don't think I can swallow a single bite tonight. Derek immediately stepped forward, placing his wine glass down on the polished wooden sideboard. Moving with a sudden, predatory quickness, he positioned himself directly behind my dining chair. He crossed his thick arms over his chest. You know how she is, Dad, his large frame completely blocking the only direct path to the hallway exit. The physical intimidation wasn't subtle in the least. It was a clear, calculated signal. I was no longer the master of this estate. Richard, you really need to keep your strength up, Derek said. Richard, you really need to keep your strength up, Derek said, dropping his voice into an authoritative, commanding register, laced with a subtle, extremely dangerous edge of absolute threat. You cannot afford to let your physical health decline like this. We have a lot of complex, extremely important family matters to handle tonight. And we need your mind sharp and ready. And Valerie reached under the document folio. It wasn't the thick, leather, bound bat gospel. It wasn't the same set, bound document, folio. Foolery wasn't set of tapered deed. It wasn't the same set of papers they had tried to push on me yesterday morning. This stack was noticeably thicker, carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of an absolute finale. She set the folio down squarely in the center of my bone china plate, right on top of the poisoned prime rib, and flipped open the heavy cover. We've been remarkably patient, Dad, Valerie cooed softly, her voice dripping with the exact same toxic, sugary sweetness she had used in the kitchen. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad? But the administrative transfer simply restructured another single day. Derek restructured the standard probate filings to make this transition completely seamless for you. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Have Mont Blanc fountain pen, sliding V, expensive Mont Blanc fountain pen, sliding it across the smooth walnut tabletop. You know how she is. The gold trim caught the soft glow of the crystal chandelier before coming to a rest right next to my right hand. However, tucked right beneath the main estate transfer forms was a secondary document printed on the formal, official letterhead of a private medical clinic. You know how she is, Dad? I instantly recognized the sharp, distinctive crest belonging to Dr. Eris Thorne. You know how she is? I asked. What is this specific paper, Valerie? I asked, allowing my fingers to trace the edge of the medical, maintaining the flawless illusion of a confused, grief-stricken old man trying to make sense of complex paperwork. Valerie didn't even blink. Her eyes were completely devoid of human warmth. Oh, that's just a standard routine consent form for a comprehensive medical evaluation, she explained smoothly, without a single second of hesitation. You've been suffering from terrible respiratory issues and elevated heart rates since the funeral, so Derek and I, Dad, thought it best to have a private concierge physician come to the estate to check your vitals. It's just a tiny precaution, Dad. We just want to make sure you're completely healthy. Just sign right there, Dad. We will take care of every single thing else. The sheer scale of her deception was mind-boggling. She was sweet-talking me into signing away my entire multi-million-dollar empire, while simultaneously giving my consent to be institutionalized. At that exact second, Derek shifted his weight behind my chair, the leather creaking under his pressure. I could feel his aggressive, hostile energy radiating downward, heavy on my shoulders. If my hesitation lasted even a moment longer, he was fully prepared to use physical intimidation to force my signature onto those papers. How she is, Dad, I looked down at the heavy gold pen resting on the table. I thought about the long decades I had spent building my enterprise, the enterprise, the endless hours of sacrifice just to ensure this family enjoyed every single luxury this world had to offer. I thought about my beautiful wife Beatrice lying comatose in her bed while her own daughter used her limp thumb to steal a fortune. I thought about the federal tactical units currently speeding down the dark, slick roads, heading straight for my front gate. I reached out my hand and slowly picked up the Mont Blanc pen. The cold metal felt unusually heavy in my trembling grip. I uncapped the golden top, the soft click echoing loudly through the tense, suffocating silence of the dining room. Valerie leaned forward, her eyes locked onto the nib with a frantic, desperate hunger. Derek stepped half a pace closer, his looming shadow completely covering my plate. You know how she is, Dad. The psychological warfare had reached its absolute peak. They truly believed they had won. They believed I was utterly broken. They believed that tonight they would march away with my entire kingdom. I hovered the pen tip precisely 1 inch above the signature line, holding my breath, waiting for the sound that would inevitably shatter their entire world. Those agonizing seconds stretched out into an absolute eternity. The silence inside the room was so incredibly dense, it felt like a physical weight was against my ears. Ceaseless inside the room, pressing against my Hudi. My hand remained suspended above those forged documents, staring at the blank line meant above those forged documents, staring at the blank line meant to seal my ultimate doom. I wouldn't write a single letter. I was simply holding them in the palm of my hand, letting them soak in the sweet illusion of victory, completely blind to the devastating storm about to detonate. I tightened my grip on the pen. I tightened my beam. Come on, Harris. I whispered in the deep quiet of my own mind. Kick down that door. I am completely ready. The heavy gold Mont Blanc pen hovered just fractions of an inch above the crisp white paper. I could hear Valerie and Derek drawing in short, shallow breaths. They were waiting for the ink to flow, waiting for me to surrender my life and my legacy. Instead, with one calm, deliberate motion, I raised the pen. I quietly snapped the golden cap back onto the nib. The metallic click sliced through the massive dining room like a gunshot. The suffocating tension shattered in an instant. Derek shifted his weight behind my chair, letting out a sharp, frustrated sigh. Valerie leaned forward, her sweet mask of care instantly slipping away to reveal raw, desperate panic. "Dad, what are you doing?" Valerie asked, her voice trembling. "You need to sign that. Right now, your health declines," I answered. "My health is perfectly fine, Valerie," I answered. My voice was no longer the faint whisper of a heartbroken widower. "You know how she is, Dad." It resonated deeply, radiating the absolute authority of a man who ruled an empire. I straightened my posture, completely abandoning the frail, defeated stance I had maintained for 2 days. I turned my head to look up at Derek, who was staring down at me in genuine confusion. "You know how she is, Dad, and I am not signing a single page of this absolute garbage." I reached inside my tailored suit jacket. You know how she is, Dad. I pulled out the worn, faded blue paper passbook, the exact same booklet Valerie had snatched from my hands and tossed away as worthless trash on the day her mother died. I tossed it right into the center of the mahogany table. It landed squarely on top of Dr. Thorne's fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. "Do you remember this little blue book, Valerie?" I asked, locking my eyes firmly onto hers. "You threw it away. You said it was completely worthless. But this booklet represents the foundation of everything this family was built upon. It represents honesty, hard work. You know how she is, Dad, and a time before my daughter turned into a parasitic vulture willing to poison her own father for money." Valerie gasped. "You know how she is, Dad," her body flinching backward into her chair as if she had been physically struck across the face. "You know how she is, Dad." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She cast a terrified glance toward Derek, silently begging him to salvage their collapsing plan. "Richard, you know how she is, Dad. You are clearly experiencing a severe cognitive episode," Derek declared, his voice dropping into a harsh, threatening growl as he moved around to the side of my chair. "You are completely hallucinating. We need to call the doctor immediately." "Sit down and close your mouth, Derek," I commanded, Cecil slicing through his pathetic intimidation attempt with razor-sharp precision. I reached down to the floor, pulling Mike's heavy, the brass clamps, and drew out heavy leather briefcase, up onto my lap. I popped open the hard Panala folder, slamming it first manalitable, slamming it hard onto the table. "I am not hallucinating," I continued. "I am not arrogant son-in-law. I am staring at my arrogant son-in-law. I am simply exceptionally well-informed. I know everything about your pathetic, desperate existence, Derek. I know about the massive mountain of toxic debt you're hiding. I know about the violent loan sharks coming after you for missed payments. And I know that the $28 million offshore wire transfer to the Cayman Islands has been permanently frozen by federal authorities. You know how she is, Dad." Every drop of color drained from Derek's face in a split second. The smug, confident wealth manager vanished, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. He stumbled backward. "You know how she is, Dad," his legs knocking hard against the edge of the sideboard. I opened the folder, grabbing the stack of glossy, high-resolution photographs, and scattered them across the fine bone china. "But worst of all, Derek," I said, "you know how she is, Dad," my voice dripping with pure disgust. "I know about your beautiful, sunlit house in Orlando. I know about your blonde mistress, and I know about your 3-year-old son." Valerie let out a sharp, shattered scream. She grabbed the photos, her eye scanning wildly over the images of Derek holding another woman and swinging a little blonde child around a bright Florida backyard. Her hands shook violently. "He's been playing you for a complete fool, Valerie," I stated, delivering the brutal truth with mechanical efficiency. He'd laughed about it. "You know how she is, Dad. He's been systematically draining of dollars from your monthly allowance to secretly fund his entirely separate second family. You know how she is, Dad. He used my money to build a parallel universe, and he was planning to use that stolen offshore capital to flee the country and leave you utterly ruined." "Derek, what is this?" Valerie shrieked, tears of absolute horror spilling down her cheeks. She hurled the photos directly at his chest. "Tell me this is a lie. Tell me right now." Derek was completely speechless. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperate for an exit. "Don't count on a coward to tell you the truth, Valerie," I said, my voice ringing out clearly through the chaos. "But don't you sit there playing the innocent, heartbroken victim either. The moment you stepped into your dying mother's hospice room, you surrendered any right to the moral high ground. Valerie froze entirely. Her tears stopped flowing. The sheer terror in her eyes was bottomless. I reached back into the briefcase and pulled out the final stack of paper for throwing undeniable evidence onto the table. It was a sequential series of clear stills, printed directly from the hidden security camera footage. The images clearly showed Valerie's Beatrice comatose body. Over Beatrice's comatose body, standing over. They showed her grabbing her mother's frail, lifeless hands and forcefully pressing her thumb onto the dark ink pad. I watched the video, Valerie, I whispered. I watched the video, Valerie, I whispered, the raw, searing pain of a grieving husband leaking through my hardened exterior. I watched you physically violate the woman who gave you life. I watched you use her helpless, dying body to stamp forged wire transfers so you could steal her legacy. You didn't even have the decency to wipe the black ink off her fingers before walking out to leave her alone. Dad, no, please, I can explain, Valerie sobbed, shrinking back in desperately her chair, desperately trying to block out the horrific visual proof of her own monstrous descent. There is no explanation for pure evil, I roared, slamming my fist down onto the solid walnut table, so hard the crystal glasses rattled violently. You know how she is, Dad. You were planning on poisoning my food tonight. You were planning to use Dr. Thorne to declare me legally insane. You know how she is, Dad. You were going to lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life just to steal my remaining wealth. You are a vile, disgusting predator, Valerie. You are a vile, disgusting predator, Valerie. The sheer weight of the absolute truth squeezed the very oxygen out of the dining room. Valerie buried her face in her hands, weeping hysterically, utterly exposure of her unforgivable crimes. Derek, however, wasn't crimes. Derek, however, wasn't weeping. Realizing his total destruction fundamentally altered his brain chemistry. He'd at the $28 million was gone forever. He realized the federal authorities knew everything. The federal authorities were closing in, and he had nothing left to give them. A guttural roar. A guttural roar ripped from his throat. You know how she is. Completely losing his mind, he lunged wildly across the mahogany table. Derek's heavy hands were just inches from my throat, his face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate violence. Expensive crystal wine glasses shattered, his knees crashing against the edge of the walnut table. You know how she dent G, sending deep red wines flooding across the forged medical documents. Time seemed to slow to a complete crawl. I know how she is, Dad. I didn't flinch in the slightest. I didn't move a single muscle to defend myself. I simply sat in my chair with absolute calm, staring straight into the wide, you know how she is, Dad? Manic eyes of a man who realized his entire existence was over, before a single one of Derek's filthy fingers could even graze the lapels of my tailored jacket. You know how she is, Dad? A deafening thunderclap shook the very foundation of the massive estate. You know how she is, Dad? The heavy, reinforced oak front door was blown clean off its iron hinges. The horrific sound of splintering wood and shattering glass echoed violently down the long hallway, followed immediately by the heavy rhythmic thuds of tactical boots slamming against the polished hardwood floor. Fully know how she is. Fully armed federal agents, clad in black tactical armor, poured into the formal dining room like a massive, unstoppable wave of absolute justice. The sheer speed and overwhelming physical force demonstrated by this calculated breach were terrifying to behold. The dark, suffocating trap Valerie and Derek had built around me shattered in a single second under the bright tactical flashlights and the commanding shouts of federal law enforcement. FBI, get your hands up, on the ground right now. Special Agent Harris, a tall, Dad, commanding figure with eyes like polished steel, led the primary tactical team straight into the center of the room. Derek froze midair, suspended awkwardly over the ruined table. The fierce, animalistic rage in his eyes was extinguished instantly, replaced by a hollow, wide-eyed stare of pure, paralyzing terror. "Don't move a single muscle, Derek," Agent Harris commanded, his voice carrying unquestioned authority. "I know how she is, Dad." A heavy tactical rifle was aimed directly at the center of Derek's chest. Derek slowly raised his trembling hands. The golden pen dropped onto the fine china plate with a soft clink. Two heavy-armored federal agents moved in without hesitation. They roughly grabbed the lapels of Derek's expensive suit, yanking him violently away from the edge of the table. "You know how she is, Dad." They slammed his tall frame hard against the hand-painted wallpaper of the dining room wall. The heavy impact knocked the wind clean out of his lungs with a sharp gasp. A loud metallic click echoed through the room as heavy sleft locked tightly around his wrists. Skemst the lofts tung to it the laftsked. Derek sagged against the wall, reduced to a pathetic, completely broken shell, with no trace left of the arrogant wealth manager who had stood in my kitchen 2 days ago. The federal agents, "You know how she is, Dad." The federal agents immediately began reciting his official rights, clearly listing off the grave charges: major, wire fraud, grand larceny, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. Valerie had completely collapsed into her padded dining chair the moment the front door was breached. She was hyperventilating wildly, her manicured hands clamped over her ears, as if she could physically block out the devastating reality unfolding around her. Bright tactile flashlights swept relentlessly across her pale, tear-streaked face. Agent Harris walked over to the table, his sharp eyes quickly evaluating the chaotic scene. He took in the shattered crystal, the spilled wine, the high-resolution photos of Derek's secret Florida family, and the unmistakable surveillance stills showing his cold gaze land Valerie assaulting her comatose mother, Silt. Finally, his cold gaze landed on the heavy leather medical folio and the forged estate transfer documents resting on my plate. "Are you completely uninjured, Richard?" Agent Harris asked, his tone shifting into a respectful, professional register. "I am perfectly fine, Agent Harris," I answered smoothly, adjusting the crisp cuffs of my dark suit jacket. "I have secured all primary physical evidence right here on the table. The original digital files were transmitted direct to your secure fed by my private investigator. You have absolutely everything required to proceed with immediate arrests." Valerie suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed shock. She watched as the heavily armed agents marched Derek toward the ruined front door. She saw another federal agent, that busy federal agent, step toward her, drawing a second pair of cold steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. The absolute gravity of the situation finally pierced through her toxic, entitled illusion. "Dad, please!" Valerie screamed, a sharp, utterly desperate sound that tore through the room. "You know how she is, Dad." She threw herself off her dining chair, falling heavily onto her knees right beside me on the hard floor. She grabbed the fabric of my trousers, her hot tears soaking into the dark wool. "Dad, you can't let them do this. You have to stop them. Tell them this is all just a huge mistake. You know how she is, Dad. She looked up at me in sheer desperation, her face a pathetic mask of pure terror. Tell them. This is just a simple family misunderstanding. Dad, I'm your biological daughter. You love me. You promised Mom you would always take care of me. You know how she is, Dad. Don't let them take me away in steel handcuffs. Please, Dad, I will do anything you want. I looked down silently at the woman weeping and shaking violently on the polished floor. I felt absolutely nothing inside. The deep, loving, paternal bond that had defined my entire adult life was completely gone, replaced by a cold, impenetrable void. He'd laughed about it. I saw clearly, Dad, that that exact same manicured hands begging for a father's mercy were the ones that had pressed black ink onto Beatrice's fragile, dying thumb. You know how she is, Dad? I slowly leaned down and firmly unclasped her fingers from my clothes. I stood up from the head of the table, looking down at her with absolute, unyielding coldness. You told me the things your mother left behind were just trash, Valerie, I said calmly, my voice steady and final. I'm just taking out the trash. The female agent firmly gripped her arms, pulling her straight up to her feet. Valerie let out a shattered, agonizing wail as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. She sobbed uncontrollably as they marched her out of the estate. You know how she is, Dad. The nightmare was finally over. 6 months have passed since that dark night in my dining room. You know how she is, Dad. The steady march of time has a power to wash away the heavy ash left behind by a massive fire. Harichet, you know how she is, Dad. Derek currently resides in a maximum security federal prison. The elite financial crimes task force completely dismantled his intricate shadow network, leaving no loose ends behind. The presiding judge handed down a severe 15-year sentence with no possibility of early parole. You know how he traded his tailored suits for standard orange scrubs, spending his empty days locked behind reinforced steel doors, stripped of his arrogant pride and his stolen wealth. The violent loan sharks he had feared so deeply were systematically swept up in subsequent investigations, though that offered him zero comfort in his cold, isolated cell. Valerie barely avoided a lengthy federal prison term. When she finally realized the absolute strength of the cowardice to criminal case against her, her cowardice over she turned state's evidence, testifying against her husband in exchange for legal immunity regarding the medical fraud and conspiracy charges. However, her physical freedom came at a crushing cost. She was late and entirely She was entirely penniless. Tuesday, the federal government seized every asset purchased with Derek's illicit funds. I legally disinherited her, cutting off all financial and familial ties without a second thought. You know how she is, Dad. My attorneys ensured she would never touch a single cent of my estate or her mother's trust. She now works a low-wage retail job on the outskirts of the city, taking the bus home every day to a tiny, crowded apartment. She has sent me dozens of handwritten letters, desperately begging for forgiveness and pleading for a second chance to be a family. I have returned every single letter unopened. The bridge between us was permanently burned to ash by her own horrific choices. Today, the autumn air is crisp and refreshing. I stand quietly, you know how she is, Dad. I stand quietly on a bustling street-toric district, looking fondly at a beautiful brick building. This was Beatrice's old bookstore, her favorite place in the entire world. Using the $28 million recovered from the frozen Entitlement accounts, I purchased the entire property and the surrounding lots. And the surrounding lots. I transformed You Know How She Is, Dad, into the modest shop, into the Beatrice Vance Literary Foundation. A massive, fully funded piaffensation into providing confidential organization dedicated to comprehensive programs. It provides comprehensive literacy programs, fully funded scholarships, and beautiful community libraries for underprivileged children across the state. I laughed out it. I watch She Is, Dad. I watch a group of young students walk happily through the polished oak doors, their bright faces illuminated by the warm golden light spilling through the large windows. Beatrice's name is beautifully carved into the solid granite above the entrance, shining brightly for the entire city to see. She is no longer defined by the tragic, fragile state of her final days. She is defined by her profound intelligence, her endless generosity, and her enduring love. A deep, absolute peace washes over my tired soul, permanently hushing the painful echoes of the past. I take one last look at those grand stone letters, knowing that justice has been served completely. He'd laughed about it. You know how she is, Dad. Predatory, who tried to destroy this family, have been wiped from my world, and the wealth they tried so desperately to steal is now building a bright future for thousands of innocent children. I smile softly, adjusting the lapels of my tailored overcoat. Turning away from the foundation building, I step gracefully into the quiet, luxurious interior of my waiting Bentley, calmly instructing my driver to take me home. He nods respectfully and pulls smoothly into the bustling traffic. But loyalty, respect, and integrity, but what truly make you its dissimile? Kindly make you a family. In life, we often turn a blind eye to the toxic actions of those we love, hoping our generosity can mend their broken character. You know how she is, Dad, but pouring money into an empty soul only breeds entitlement, never gratitude. You know how she is, Dad. True strength isn't just about providing for your family. It's about having the absolute courage to cut away the rot when those family members turn into parasites. Never let your love blind you, and never let anyone, even your own flesh and blood, mistake your kindness for weakness.